Welcome, everyone, to the Vulture Podcast YouTube channel.
Great to be here.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into something pretty huge, China's dominance in the electric vehicle market.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic. We've got some great material to work with.
We do. There's a really insightful article from MIT Technology Review, a pretty lively Reddit discussion that throws up some interesting points, and also a more policy-focused paper from IPE.
Right. The Institute for Applied Economic Research gives that high-level view.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to unpack all of this. We want to figure out the key factors behind China getting so far ahead in EVs.
Looking at, the government side, the tech advancements, market stuff.
And also bring in those perspectives from the Reddit discussions. See what people are saying about the global competition aspect.
To begin.
And hey, if you find this analysis interesting and want more deep dives like this one, please do hit that subscribe button for the Vulture Podcast YouTube channel. Okay, so where do we start? Maybe China's auto industry before EVs really took off.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the MIT Tech Review piece points out something interesting. Back in the early 2000s, China was, already making a lot of traditional cars, fossil fuel cars.
Right, a big manufacturer.
A huge manufacturer. But they didn't really have strong domestic brands. Not ones that could truly compete on the global stage with the established players from, say, Germany, Japan, the US.
So they were making cars, but maybe not leading the innovation or brand recognition side.
Exactly. They were kind of, vulnerable in a way within this really critical global industry.
Okay, so the move into EVs, it wasn't just following a trend, it sounds more like a strategic pivot.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The article frames that push in the early 2000s as a deliberate attempt to gain a real competitive advantage, to leapfrog maybe.
Leapfrog, I like that. Because let's be honest, back then EVs weren't exactly mainstream.
Not at all. They were mostly experiments, right? You had companies like GM, Toyota dipping their toes in.
Yeah, the EV1, some early hybrids.
But they often discontinue them after just a few years. It wasn't a sustained push. So for China to go big on EVs back then, that was a significant risk.
A huge gamble, really, especially when you think about countries that were already strong in traditional cars.
Well, that's a key point the IPA paper and the MIT article both touch on. Countries like Japan, for instance, with really strong hybrid production.
Yeah, they were already making super fuel-efficient cars.
Exactly. So the incentive for them to just, ditch all that and go full electric wasn't as strong, maybe. They were kind of comfortable.
Whereas China saw an opening. A chance to lead in the next generation of cars.
Precisely. They identified this emerging space where the established players maybe weren't moving as fast or decisively.
So how did the government actually make this happen? What were the mechanisms?
Well, the MIT Tech Review article really highlights the Chinese government's ability to, shall we say, concentrate resources, focus firepower on industries they deem strategically vital.
We've seen that with semiconductors recently, too.
Exactly the same playbook, arguably. So starting around 2009, they began rolling out really substantial financial subsidies, direct payments to companies making EVs.
And not just for regular cars people buy.
No, and this is important. It included buses, taxis, public transport. That helped build scale and visibility early on, different from some other places that focus mainly on personal car incentives initially.
Right. And you mentioned sales were tiny back then, like under 500 EVs sold in 2009.
Yeah, minuscule numbers. So these subsidies weren't just a small nudge. They had to be pretty hefty to get things moving.
Makes sense. And folks, if you're finding this look into China's EV strategy useful, just a quick reminder to subscribe to the Vulture Podcast YouTube channel for more deep dives.
Absolutely. So these subsidies, they kind of did two main things. First, they gave the companies cash to actually invest. R&D, improving the cars, sorting out manufacturing.
Building better EVs, basically.
Right. And second, it made the cars cheaper for people and fleets to actually buy. Tackled that affordability hurdle, which, as the MIT article notes, was crucial to get any kind of initial traction.
Okay, so government money greased the wheels, but you can't build an EV revolution without the core tech, right? The batteries.
Well, absolutely central. All our sources hammer this point home. The battery is the heart of the EV.
And the most expensive part, too, I think the MIT article said like 40% of the cost.
Around that, yeah. It's the critical component. And this is where China took a really distinct path, technologically speaking.
How so?
Well, while a lot of Western automakers were focusing on NMC batteries, that's lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt.
Okay.
Chinese companies really pushed hard on LFP, lithium iron phosphate.
LFP, right. I remember hearing about those. They were like safer. And cheaper.
Safer, definitely cheaper.
Yeah.
Big advantages. But they had downsides initially.
Yeah, what were they? Less range, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Lower energy density.
Lower energy density was the big one, yeah, meaning less range per charge. And they also didn't perform quite as well in very cold weather.
Okay, so clear trade-offs. Why did China bet so heavily on LFP then, despite those issues?
That's the interesting part. The MIT article suggests that while others maybe shied away because of those limitations, Chinese firms, especially the big battery maker CATL,
CATL, yeah, huge name now.
they made massive, sustained investments in LFP research for like a decade. They were playing the long game.
And did it pay off? Did they fix those problems?
They dramatically narrowed the gap. They significantly improved the energy density of LFP batteries. So much so that by late 2022, LFP batteries made up something like a third of all EV batteries globally.
Wow, a third! That's huge. From being the sort of second best option.
It really shows the power of that focused, long-term R&D investment. They turned a perceived disadvantage into a competitive edge, especially on cost and safety.
Incredible. And there's another battery advantage China has, isn't there? Something about the supply chain.
Yes, absolutely critical. And the MIT article really drills down on this. It's not just about digging stuff out of the ground.
Right, it's the processing.
It's the refining. China might not have the biggest deposits of all the raw materials, like lithium or cobalt, but they utterly dominate the refining capacity. Processing cobalts, nickel sulfate, lithium hydroxide, graphite.
The stuff that actually goes into the battery cells.
Exactly. The article quotes an expert saying this dominance over refining gives them absolute control of the sector. It's a massive strategic advantage because building that refining capacity elsewhere is complex, expensive, and takes time. It's a huge barrier to entry.
So they've got the government push, the battery tech advantage, and control over the processing of key materials. That's quite a combination.
It really is. And it laid the groundwork for what we see today.
Which, according to the MIT piece, is a Chinese EV market with just enormous domestic demand now.
The numbers are pretty stark. That 2021 survey mentioned over half of Chinese respondents said they plan to buy an EV for their next car.
50%. Wow.
Yeah, highest globally, apparently double the global average at the time. That massive home market is just, well, rocket fuel for the local manufacturers.
Gives them scale, experience, cash flow.
Everything they need to grow and innovate.
And the result is this incredibly varied landscape of Chinese EV makers we see now. It's not just one or two companies.
No, it's really diverse. You've got the established players who transition from petrol cars like BYD as AIC, GM Willing,
BYD is everywhere now, it seems.
It really are. But then you also have these really successful startups that basically came out of nowhere in the last decade. NIO, XPeng, Li Auto.
Yeah, those names pop up all the time.
And they've achieved significant recognition in sales incredibly quickly. It's quite something.
Okay, so China built this dominant position domestically. Let's pivot now to the global picture and that Reddit discussion. What are people saying out there?
Well, the Reddit thread really gets into the competitive aspect. Is the US, or the West more broadly, basically just handing the EV market over to China? That's kind of the core question being debated.
And I imagine there are some strong opinions on that.
Definitely. You see arguments like Chinese companies just moved faster. Partly because their home market wasn't so stuck on the old combustion engine way of doing things.
Less baggage, maybe?
Less baggage, yeah. And that strong government support we talked about, which some commenters felt was, well, lacking or slower elsewhere.
And speed seems to be a big theme in that discussion, too.
Oh, yeah. Multiple people brought up the development cycles, how China seems to be able to bring out new models or updates in like years or even months.
Compared to the West, where you hear about, 5-year minimums for a new platform.
Right. That sheer speed and agility is seen as a massive competitive advantage. Hard to keep up with.
And does profitability come up? Can Western companies actually make money on EVs yet?
That's a definite concern raised on Reddit. Are EVs profitable for Ford or GM or VW at the prices they need to sell them at to compete, especially with Chinese brands?
Which ties back into the battery costs and supply chain issue we discussed.
Exactly. Leads to that whole debate. Should the U.S. just buy Chinese batteries for now to get EVs out there faster while trying to build its own supply chain in parallel?
Tricky one. What do the Reddit comments suggest?
It's mixed. Some say, yeah, be pragmatic, buy the batteries now, build your own capacity for the long term, get cars on the road.
Accelerate the transition.
Others are more wary, geopolitical risks, economic security concerns. Should we be so reliant on China for such a critical technology?
Understandable concerns. Did people on Reddit blame the car companies themselves at all? Or just governments?
Oh, there was definitely some direct criticism of the established automakers. Some commenters used pretty blunt language. Lazy, incompetent, fearful of change.
Ouch.
Yeah, basically saying the companies are too slow, too complacent, didn't see the shift coming, or didn't want to adapt. Putting more blame on them than just, say, policy differences.
But it's not like the U.S. has no EV companies, right?
No, and the Reddit thread acknowledges that too. People mention Tesla, obviously.
Yeah.
But also Lucid, Rivian.
The newer player.
Right. And some argue, hey, let's not write off North America yet. These companies are still scaling up. Give them time to compete before saying the game is lost.
What about the U.S. subsidies? The $7,500 tax credit. Did that come up?
It did. And there was some cynicism there. A few commenters argued that manufacturers just raised their prices by roughly that amount, so the subsidy doesn't really help the buyer as much as intended. It just pads the company's margin.
That's a common debate with subsidies, I suppose.
Yeah. And zooming out, there's this bigger strategic worry voiced on Reddit. Is China positioning itself to dominate not just EVs, but maybe the whole green tech revolution, plus robotics, for the next couple of decades?
It's a sobering thought.
One person even called it a potential Kodak moment for the global auto industry, a real disruptive shift where the old giants missed the boat.
Wow, like digital cameras wiping out film?
Kind of, yeah. Though data security concerns were also raised, could Chinese EVs face bans in some markets over spying fears?
That's definitely a factor in the current climate.
And interestingly, some saw partnerships as a way forward, like Volkswagen teaming up with XPeng in China. Maybe collaboration is part of the answer for Western firms.
An interesting strategy. Okay, let's bring in the IPEA paper now for that broader policy context and maybe look ahead.
Right. The IPEA paper offers that really useful kind of 30,000-foot view. It emphasizes that China's EV dominance is fundamentally linked to its position as the world's biggest car market and the biggest energy consumer.
So the scale itself is a huge factor.
Huge. And the shift to EVs there has massive global ripple effects for oil markets, obviously, but also for climate change efforts, given China's emissions profile and reliance on imported oil.
And the paper also stresses the importance of science and tech, right? Which fits with the battery story.
Absolutely. It highlights how crucial R&D is and how Chinese policy consistently prioritizes it for EVs.
It's not just about assembly lines.
No, it's a convergence. The IPEA paper points this out. The EV industry brings together automotive, chemical, and electronics sectors. You need expertise and cooperation across all three.
And they looked at patents, didn't they? Early on.
Yeah, fascinating look back. From 2000 to 2011, their analysis showed electronics companies actually held most of the patents for battery components. The car companies held patents for the vehicle itself.
Interesting split. And Japan was strong then.
Japan was a major player in patent filings during that early phase, yes.
But how did that change by, say, 2021, according to IPA?
Total transformation. By 2021, China was dominant across the board downstream. Material processing, cell components, the battery cells themselves, and EV production. Just look at the top battery makers in 2022.
Mostly Chinese names.
Overwhelmingly. CATL, BYD, CALB. Then you had a couple South Korean firms like LG and SK On, and just one Japanese company, Panasonic, in the top tier.
That really illustrates the shift, and the IPA paper links this back to specific policies too.
Definitely. They mention things like the double credit system.
How does that work?
It basically forces car makers in China to produce a certain quota of new energy vehicles, or NEVs, which are mostly EVs. If they don't meet the quota, they have to buy credits from companies that exceed it, like Tesla or BYD.
Ah, so it creates a direct financial incentive or penalty to make EVs.
Exactly. A strong market mechanism driven by policy. And this fits into their bigger plans, like Made in China 2025 and the 5-year plans. They explicitly state the goal of building a world-leading domestic EV industry.
It's all very joined up.
Very. Their Technology Roadmap 2.0 clearly flags pure electric drive and smart vehicle tech as priorities, setting really ambitious targets for production, sales, market share. It's a long-term, coherent strategy.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. If we take that step back, what's the big picture?
Well, connecting all these sources, it's clear China's rise in EVs isn't down to just one thing. It's a potent mix. You've got the very deliberate, well-funded government strategy.
The subsidies, the policies like double credits.
Right. Then you have major technological wins, especially with LFP batteries, in controlling that crucial refining part of the supply chain.
Huge advantages there.
And underpinning it all is that massive, eager domestic market. Millions of consumers ready and willing to buy EVs.
So government, tech, and market demand all pulling in the same direction?
Pretty much.
I did.
And the sources we looked at, the detailed analysis from MIT and IPA, plus the sort of ground-level debate on Reddit, they all paint this picture of a really dramatic shift happening incredibly fast in the auto world.
And that big question hanging over it all, can other countries really compete effectively now?
It's tough. It's not just about building factories. It's about securing those supply chains, driving innovation faster, and getting consumers on board in the same way. Lots of hurdles.
What really stands out is just the sheer speed and scale of China's EV revolution. It's not gradual, it's been explosive.
Absolutely. They haven't just adopted EVs. They're actively shaping the future of the entire industry.
Okay, so maybe a final thought to leave our listeners with. Considering this dominance from raw materials through refining, batteries, software, right up to the finished car, how might this reshape, global economic power? And what kind of strategic moves could we see from the US, Europe, Japan, others in response?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's bound to cause shifts, and we're likely only seeing the beginning of the responses. Definitely a space to watch.
Indeed. A conversation that's going to keep going for years. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into China's EV dominance. We hope you found it insightful.
Yeah, hopefully food for thought.
We definitely encourage you to keep exploring these topics, read the source materials if you can, and form your own views. And one last time, please do subscribe to the Vulture Podcast YouTube channel for more analyses like this. Thanks for listening.